This is Chamber Voices, conversations with the people that drive local business. Presented by the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce.
Well, hello and welcome to Chamber Voices. My name is Stuart McIntosh, the host of this podcast, which is a presentation of the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce. I mean it when I say it is a pleasure to have you on board for this episode. It is also my distinct pleasure to bring onto the show Nicole Bouchier, the Chief Executive Officer and co-owner of Bouchier, a group of companies that have existed since 2004, since their founding, and even before that, when David Bouchier began operating as an independent contractor. Very humble beginnings, and today the company represents more than 1,200 employees with operations obviously in the RMWB, but as well as across Alberta, and they continue to grow. This is going to be a great episode. Nicole, thanks for coming on. I want to begin by just asking, how are you? How have you been?
I'm actually really, really well. Thank you for asking. I think despite everything going on and what a crazy year we've all had, both professionally and personally, I think I'm doing quite well. And, you know, as long as the family and the family's healthy and the kids are good, you know, life is pretty good.
You know what? I'm feeling the same way. There's been a lot of turmoil. Some days you think to yourself, can I go on today? Is this the day when I finally just decide to give up? But the truth is, as you just alluded to, your kids, the relationships that you have at home, they're a big motivator during these times to just take another day, start all over again, put on your shoes like you normally do, and just make it happen, right?
Exactly.
Bouchier, as a group, is quite ubiquitous in the RMWB. It's a major contractor, a major company with many different facets to it. And I love to be able to get into the story, the origin story, kind of like a superhero. Like Superman has an origin story, so does yourself, and so does Bouchier. Bouchier, as an entity, was launched in 1998 with nothing more than a Caterpillar bulldozer and a phrase that I love to use, an entrepreneurial spirit. I would love to hear your story and the growth of the business and where you kind of fit in the story as it continues.
Oh, for sure. And you know, the story really starts with our founder, which is my husband, David Bouchier. And it, you know, the 1997, 1998 timeframe was before my time for sure. And he had started with a used piece of equipment from Fort McMurray that he purchased off them. And he started in his own backyard right in the community. And he was doing community works with a piece of equipment as he held a full-time job as a GM with Fort McMurray Group of Companies. And that kind of was his story when CNRL Horizon started. He kind of ventured over there on their winter drilling programs, but he always held a full-time job. And when things started to boom in our region with CNRL Horizon in about 2004, and we were together, and that's when we kind of it was before we were even married, actually. Mm-hmm. And that's when we kind of identified, things are booming. You know, this is becoming more than a second job for both of us at that time. Maybe we need to move away from, I was with Shell Canada and he was with Fort McMurray. So we actually left our jobs and dived into, it was a big risk. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions to ever make because we loved our jobs and they paid very well. And, you know, it provided for the family. And so it was a big step, but we knew we had to, we told ourselves the worst that could happen is we would fail and we would quit it and we'd go back and get our wonderful jobs or something similar. Again. Yeah. So that's why we made the move. I will say we haven't looked back since. I will say that first year in business was the hardest lesson of my life. We finished the year in a negative $250,000 position.
Oh, no.
And funny enough, when we found out that we were in the negative, we were actually on our honeymoon in Mexico at the time. And I decided to go look at our year-end fiscal statements because I knew they were coming in from a local accounting firm. And the gentleman who sent them over saying, we really can't have any surprises like this going forward anymore. And then I scrolled to the bottom line and it was all in red, negative $250,000. Mm-hmm. So, needless to say, it put a damper on a honeymoon, that's for sure, because we had worked our butts off for the whole year, taking on every role possible, each of us within the organization. And I had put steel-toed boots on and a hard hat and went in the field and was getting my safety designation and you name it. So we felt absolutely deflated and didn't know how we were going to turn things around and almost packed it in right there. So it was a hard lesson, but it was a good lesson. And I'm really happy that we learned our hardest lesson in business that first year, because I really think it set us up for the success we've had since.
The way that I kind of internalize this sort of story you just told me is to think, what might I have done in my life that might compare to that? And I don't believe there's a story in my world that might compare to that, particularly the fact that it was during your honeymoon that you might have discovered that. Knowing myself, I would have given up. I don't think that I could have done it. But then again, I am not the same kind of person as many of the entrepreneurs that I speak to on this podcast. I know that it takes a certain kind of fortitude. How did you come to the conclusion that, okay, this was an extremely challenging year, and this was probably the worst news we could have received, but we will continue?
Part of it was wanting to be curious. So it was curiosity on how did we get here, and why? How did we allow ourselves to get here? So it was learning that and the curiosity around that, which, later on we found out that the way we handled our purchase order system, so there was a lot more going out the door that we weren't, throughout the year, that we weren't tallying in a proper PO system. And so all the bills kind of piled in at the very end. And a lot of it had to do with our equipment maintenance for sure. And what happened throughout the winter and various vendors coming out to help out and not giving them a proper PO and so on. So part of it was curiosity, but both of us are the type of people that we're very competitive, both Dave and I, and we're always up for a challenge. So I think it was that, hey, we failed. That can't be possible. So how are we going to turn this around? And how are we going to challenge ourselves just to, do better, right? And the interesting thing I think about both of us as individuals and the company is we don't really measure ourselves against other people. We very much measure ourselves against ourselves. So it's like, we did this year. How can we do it better next year, right? And I think that's been very important in the history of our company as well.
I think entrepreneurs or any business owner should take note. Measure yourself against yourself. I don't think it can be much simpler than that. That's a lesson you really only need to learn once. So
absolutely. Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
Absolutely.
And so here we are in the year 2021. Bouchier has just such an amazing reach. You've expanded into many different aspects of industry up here. Nicole, can you kind of go into detail about what offerings Bouchier, and I mean, like, if you can provide a timeline, that would be great, but can you kind of go into depth about the offerings that Bouchier can currently provide and kind of how they might have come to be?
Sure. Yeah, we operate right now with about 400 pieces of equipment. That's definitely where we started. At the core was in small civil works, and medium-sized heavy equipment and road maintenance. So our first long-term contract was in road maintenance for Horizon. We're still there today doing the same contract, albeit it's been rebid numerous times over the years. With the onboarding of, or the acquisition of Carillion Canada a number of years ago, which we've since bought back our shares. But when they came on board, they brought facility maintenance with them. And so then we expanded out our civil division to include facility maintenance, taking care of buildings at the sites. We also expanded out into some project management experience. So we do some projects throughout the region. So there's kind of those three aspects: civil and road maintenance, facility maintenance, and project works. And right now we have just under 1,200 people working for us in those divisions. Amazing.
Bouchier is now one of the largest and certainly one of the most respected Indigenous owned and operated service companies, in Canada. That must be such an amazing, I shouldn't say surreal, because like you said, you and your husband, you're both winners, you're both goal-minded individuals, but to think about that, which I'm sure you must do often, that must really do something for you.
It's interesting because you keep saying about how we're large or maybe seem large in the region. We don't see ourselves that way. We see ourselves very small still, and we feel like we have a long way to go, and there's so much more we could always do for this region, for Indigenous peoples throughout Canada. And I think it's probably that far-fetching goal that keeps us driven every day to get out of bed and keep moving with the company and where it's going.
I'm glad that you mentioned this because I wanted to really make this a focal point of our conversation. You can visit Boucher's website, that is boucher.ca/giving back. It's giving-back. And there you can see kind of an overview of the kind of investment that Boucher makes in our community. And it seems to me that there are three main columns of investment: culture and community, youth, and female power empowerment, which, Nicole, I know that is something that you are particularly involved in. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. When I think of Boucher, and this is probably a distinction that a lot of companies would love to have, but not many can achieve. And when I associate Boucher in my mind with the community, it kind of goes hand in hand because you've basically, from early on, it seems that's been a foundational thing for your company, is to make that investment where it matters, right?
Yeah, and I really appreciate those words because that is definitely what we set out to be, as a friend to our Wood Buffalo community, and that's how we wanted to be seen, was that good neighbor and that friend in a time of need. We've continued to invest throughout the COVID year, probably more than we ever have, because if there's now is not the time to be turning your back on your community. And so we've taken that, and towards the end of the year, we introduced the Family Foundation to the mix, and we wrapped up the 2020 year with the 12 Days of Giving, which the Family Foundation donated $100,000 back into the Wood Buffalo community.
Wow.
So giving is just so fundamental to what we do and so important, no matter what pillar it falls under. We don't like to rein ourselves in too much because it's really important that you're able to shift with the community and what's going on with the community and give where it's making sense that year. Case in point, we had a great opportunity with Boys and Girls Club throughout the flood this past year. Yeah, they needed their insurance premium payment paid, and so we just came to the table with that. Those are the things that, being an owner of a company, those are the things that you're proud to do and you really want to do, right?
Yeah, that story, when it broke, I mean, we are now about 1 year removed from the flood, almost exactly. And I guess I was somewhat callous. I was somewhat numb to the fallout of the flood afterwards. But I have to say, when the video of the Boys and Girls Club, when the damage that the flood had done to their facility was shared online, I think that was what, for me, that's what got me. And then it made me pay very close attention to the fact that our community was hurting and that we needed, as a community, to come together and support our nonprofits and support those in need. There's a vulnerability. So it's great to hear that it's part of your culture. It's from day one how you do business, which is great, Nicole.
Thank you. Yeah, it's our foundation, one of our foundational elements, both as a company and a family, for sure.
I'm eager to kind of hear, this is all the preamble leading up to Nicole Bouchier, the person who is obviously the CEO of Boucher, the company. I would love to know, Nicole, what are you passionate about, and how might your passions kind of interweave themselves into what you do at Boucher?
I think I'm definitely have a few things that I'm passionate about, and obviously it changes over the years, and as you change as an individual and mature and get more experienced in different things. So probably what I was passionate about 20 years ago is different to where it is right now. Obviously, philanthropy is something I'm extremely passionate about, and it's the reason why I started the Boucher Family Foundation, because I wanted to ensure that those values were instilled in my children. Dave and I have 5 children together. And
oh, great.
It's very important that they understand the meaning of giving and being a part of your community and having that social responsibility to give back to your community. So I'm very passionate about that. I'm actually very passionate about hiking. I like to spend a lot of time outdoors, which, living up in Fort McMurray, so many people don't appreciate our outdoors and what it has to offer. And growing up here, some of my most memorable times as a child is when, my dad and mom would pack us all into the boat and we go down Athabasca River to Athabasca Lake camping for a couple of weeks. So, Dave and I spend a lot of time outdoors. We have a cabin up north, a fly-in fishing cabin. So very passionate about the outdoors. But within the company, I'm really passionate about seeing people grow. I'm really passionate about my team members and getting behind them. And I love identifying when I could see the potential in someone that they can't see in themselves. But I know by getting behind them and really pushing them, they're going to get there. And that's probably what keeps me going to the office every single day, is just the wonderful team that I have to work with and how we gel together as a team, and the opportunities that I have to get behind them and to see them grow as team members, for sure.
You are listening to Chamber Voices, a podcast presentation of the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce. Our focus is on the people behind the business that make our community what it is. Today, speaking to Nicole Bouchier, the CEO and co-owner of Bouchier. We've spent a little bit of time now getting to understand the roots of their company and what they stand for, but I'm looking forward to speaking a little bit more about Nicole and her motivation as a leader in the second half of this podcast. We'll be back in just a moment. If you want to learn more about the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce, you can head to fortmcmurraychamber.ca or find us on Facebook at YMM Chamber.
This is Chamber Voices, conversations with the people that drive local business. Presented by the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce.
Welcome back to the second half of Chamber Voices. We're today speaking to Nicole Bouchier, CEO and co-owner of Bouchier. You can find them online, bouchier.ca, spelled Bouchier.ca. Learn a little bit about their leadership and the people behind the company, which is what we're doing today. Nicole, we left off with you kind of extolling the virtues of your team and why it's so important for you as a leader to be able to interact with them in a very meaningful way. Without going into too much depth, can you kind of give us a little bit, Nicole, your strategy behind that motivation you talked about that you're so passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. No, it definitely has to do with vision. I mean, it's really important that as a leader of your organization, you're always carrying the vision of the organization. And that vision's going to pivot depending on what's going on in the economy, case in point the last year. So you got to be able to shift with it really quickly, and you got to be able to retell that story of where you are as a company and where you're going. And I've always been very passionate about having the vision within our organization and passing that along to my fellow teammates and my leadership team. So I think in turn they're able to pass it along to their teammates. So I think it definitely starts with that vision and knowing the story that you're telling, for sure. After that, it's definitely, encouraging those one-on-ones and getting behind people and understanding who they are. Depth of relationship is extremely important. You got to spend the time with your people. You have to understand who they are outside of work as well, right? And I spend a lot of time asking people about their families and who they are outside of work. It's part of who I am, is to understand who they are outside of the work environment.
My management strategy had always been, when I was in a management position, the one-on-ones always took priority. And I can tell you, I can relate, Nicole, that there's something really important about at least every week or some increment of time. Make sure that it's always on your calendar, that the people that are directly below you or adjacent to you in some way at work, that you get that face-to-face, that one-on-one time. I couldn't agree more.
Very, very important to appreciate them and for them to feel like you appreciate. I mean, I have so much gratitude for the people that work with me because they leave their families, every day to come and join our Bouchier world, and I have a lot of appreciation for that.
Successful businesses care about their people. I think that's basically... Not much more needs to be said than that, for sure.
Absolutely.
The last 2 years, I have to find a better way to say this, but the last 2 years have, of course, been challenging. I mean, since 2016, there have been it seems as though there's been one challenge after another for our region, and a lot of times it spills over into the province, and we just seem to continue to persevere through one thing after another. So, Nicole, how have the challenges of the past, let's just keep it to the past year and a half or so, how have those challenges strengthen your resolve to build the company, to improve, and to just move ahead?
Yeah, this past year was one of the more trying years in the history of the company, for sure, as I'm sure any entrepreneur would say at this point in time, for sure, all across the world.
Yep.
About a year ago, when COVID hit and we were sitting at about 1,200 employees, we quickly watched it dwindle, and we thought it was going to dwindle down to 300 employees. And that was a lot for me to get my head around. One, because people are losing jobs. People with families are losing jobs, and that was first and foremost the most concerning thing on my mind. And then you start to shift over to the business, and what does that mean for the future of the business? And at one point we thought maybe we'd have to close the doors. So there was a lot of fear there for the first couple of months when COVID first hit. Interesting enough, though, we shifted again with it. I had to make some hard calls on a top end from an overhead perspective immediately. I'm not one to sit around too long. I tend to make change right away. And I did that as I normally do. And I think it helped us survive for the rest of the year. And then we had to go back out and work with our valued clients to adjust our rates because they were going through the same thing that we were going through and everybody else. So we worked with them to adjust rates down, and then we ended up ramping back up as the fall continued. So it was just constant change, though. Yeah. It was just a lot of constant change. Dave and I used the opportunity last summer to jump back into the business within our maintenance team, to use the opportunity to spend time on the ground at our head office in Fort McMurray and do disposals of all our equipment and really get in there and roll up our sleeves and help out. And that's what we used our time to do throughout the last year, which I think is very healthy as owners to get back in every now and again and really spend that time. So.
Definitely. And I would imagine that the lessons learned from year one of Bouchier probably applied to a lot of what you had to go through in 2020.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that year one of Bouchier, again, is probably the reason why I changed so quickly, or I'm not one to sit around and wait to see what's going to happen. I just make the decision to make the changes rather quickly, sometimes maybe too quick, but I just, I know how it could affect things long term if you don't, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, Nicole Bouchier, the CEO of Bouchier here in our community, it is so great to have an opportunity to speak to you. You can, of course, learn about the company, their mission, what they invest in, and I'm not talking financially here, though there is financial investment when you run a company of 12,000 people, run a company of 1,200 individuals. I'm talking about the investment into culture, into youth. You can learn all about that on their website, bouchier.ca. And I know, speaking from the perspective of the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber is extremely grateful, Nicole, to have Bouchier on as a member of the Chamber of Commerce. Community means a lot, as we've already discussed. I know nobody has a crystal ball, but can you kind of give me an idea of what the next half a decade might look for your company?
Well, you said it, 12,000 employees. No, I don't think quite that big. We definitely want to spend more time in our own backyard. We do think that there are sites that we're not physically on a regular basis, so there's more to do here for sure. But we are bidding outside of the region now. We are looking at more the Edmonton kind of upgrader or heartland area for sure. And we do know there's quite a large commitment from the federal government to Indigenous procurement. So we want to tap into that a little bit. We want to explore that a little bit and see what kind of government contracts we might be able to get our hands on in the coming years. So definitely see growth in the future for sure. We're spending a lot of time this year rebuilding the foundation of the business and getting ready for future growth.
Yeah. Speaking of future growth, something that from restaurateurs to small business owners that sell, giftware or specialized items to contractors, it sounds as though a pretty major deciding factor for the success of a business moving forward is how they integrate their business online. At Bouchier, has much of the business transitioned to the web, or is it still the way it's been for the past 2 decades, where it's the face-to-face?
For us, it's more face-to-face for sure, although technology is really important and something that we're definitely keeping our eye on and kind of finger on the pulse. Any opportunity we could have to bring that into the business, we know is going to be to our advantage for sure. So we don't lose sight of that from kind of a research and innovation point of view. But very much, I think, part of what makes us special is that hands-on touch, the way that we're able to get to know our clients, spend time with them face-to-face, get to understand what their issues are and help them come to a solution together is very much the philosophy that we have.
Great, Nicole. Thank you. This usually, around this time of the show, is when I would ask for a piece of advice or something that you might be able to share with other entrepreneurs or small business owners in the community. But I mean, Nicole, you've shared quite a lot, but is there anything that maybe we haven't touched on yet? Maybe a word of advice or a piece of encouragement?
I would just say, I love our community, and I think it's at an interesting point in time right now, and I think it's at the beginning of a rebuild altogether, and I think that's really exciting, and I'd love to see us all spend more time in attracting more people to our region. Yeah. I know we've been spending time on social media really trying to explain to others what is in our own backyard, because I think Fort McMurray has a lot to offer, and it's definitely feeling like, the beginning of a rebuild, and I just love the spirit of our community, and I just encourage people to keep that up and really encourage our small business owners to hang in there and persevere, because I know that, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we are in it together, and we'll get through it.
There's something going on in 2021. You can feel it. It's just below the surface. It's this buzzy feeling that we're in store for something big this year, maybe next year, but it's coming down the pipe for sure.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
So, Nicole, I've got one last question for you. You'd mentioned that being outdoors, hiking, camping, just being a part of nature is something that's very important to you. I don't want you to give away your if you have a spot that's very, very personal to you, but could you recommend a great hike or a great day trip somewhere in the RMWB if for someone listening who's looking to get kind of immersed in that aspect of living up here?
I'll tell you my favorite thing to do, and we each own an Argo. So my favorite thing to do is to jump in the Argos and go on a 7-hour Argo trip up to our cabin at Gardner Lakes. That is my favorite thing to do. And you go through a lot of swamp and a lot of mud and different terrain, but it's being outdoors in that environment is my most favorite thing to do up here.
There's a lot going on in this community, and I think in the next half a decade or so, it is really going to come forth. If you would like to learn more about Bouchier, it's very easy. They're easy to find on the web, bouchier.ca. Nicole, thank you so much. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we part ways? Because I know you're a busy person, and I want to make sure.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to just say thank you. Funny enough, I don't get asked a whole lot to do things like this within our community. I get asked a lot from outside of the community, but my heart's here, and I'm always willing to participate and help out. So I just really appreciate the invite. Thank you very much to the Chamber of Commerce for inviting us.